If any of you would, a proponent or an opponent would like to give up your time and say, I will get this, please give this person 3 minutes instead of me a minute and a half, just let me know or let somebody know, and we will make sure to allow for that. Committee, we are going to open the final action on Senate Bill 3. Oh, and by the way, we asked for a larger room. And usually when we ask for a larger room, as you know, we're on the 5th floor, a much, much larger room. It was already occupied. So they told me this room has 11 more chairs. I don't see it. It seems about the same size as across the hall. So my apologies for those that are having to stand. So again, we're opening final action on Senate Bill 3. And Jenna, if you could just give us a very brief.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 3 makes amendments to the Lay Caregiver Act, and it would require the Department of KDHE, or would require the KDHE to audit hospital compliance with this act and then report the results of that audit to the legislature. This comes to us from the Post-Audit Committee. There was an audit requested of the Lay Caregiver Act, but because of HIPAA privacy rules, they were unable to get those records, and so this would be the solution to get those records.
Thank you very much. Committee, any questions of Jenna? Seeing none, any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, do I hear a motion on the bill? Without a motion, the bill dies. We will move on now to, that closes the final action on Senate Bill 3. We will now go to the hearing, open the hearing on Senate Bill 19. We will begin with the oral proponents. We have you in alphabetical order after Jenna gives her brief. And again, a minute and a half, you will be timed, and thank you so much for staying within the time limit.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is Senate Bill 19. If it sounds familiar, it's because it is the same as Senate Bill 330 last year, just with the years updated, and that bill died in committee. This enacts the conscientious right to refuse to prohibit discrimination against individuals who refuse certain medical care and creates a civil cause of action based on that discrimination, and also repeals some statutes. Section 1, subsection A gives the name of this bill. Subsection B would prohibit an employer, healthcare entity, which I believe is defined, school or person from committing acts based on an individual's refusal to take a vaccination, pharmaceutical, or gene editing technology, if that refusal is for reasons of conscience, which include, and those actions would include adverse employment actions, denial of goods or services, denial of entry to a place otherwise accessible to the public, segregation or separation from others, denial of housing, assessment of a financial penalty, or treatment of an individual differently from anyone else who accepted the medical intervention. And most of these came from the Kansas Acts Against Discrimination, which is in KSA Chapter 44, I believe it's Article 10, those the acts based on the refusal. Subsection C gives a civil cause of action for individuals who have suffered injury as a result of the violation, with a statute of limitations of 2 years, which is standard. A prevailing plaintiff is entitled to recover 3 times the amount of actual damages sustained, or $10,000, whichever is greater, as well as the cost of the suit and attorney's fees. And this section, or this subsection, defines conscience, employer, healthcare entity, person, and school. And the bill would also repeal some statutes, which are the Secretary of Health's quarantine authority, fines for violations of certain health statutes, criminal penalties for violating quarantine, and the local health office or secretary isolation and quarantine procedure. And those are all listed in the bill brief if you want those numbers, but I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Jenna. Committee, any questions of Jenna? Senator Petty.
So Jenna, under this bill, then if if a child or an adult had tuberculosis, since we're actually dealing with that right now, then how would that impact any kind of procedure about them attending school, if it was an active case, not an inactive case, but an active case, or work?
So if a person had tuberculosis, there are certain quarantine requirements under current law that you're supposed to follow, which would be sort of separate from just the refusal to take separate from the refusal to receive the vaccination, biologic, pharmaceutical, drug, or technology. I guess I'm unaware of any conscience reasons for not taking tuberculosis treatment, but I'll have to think about that a little bit more, but I still believe that a refusal to allow someone with an active viral case or an active case of tuberculosis to attend school and spread it to others, I think that would still be allowed by the law.
It's already covered under the law, right? Thank you very much. Committee, other questions for Jenna? Seeing none, we're going to begin with our oral proponents. And again, these are in alphabetical order, so we will start with Lindsay Burning. Lindsay, are you with us?
Chairwoman Gossage and members of the committee, I'm here today not as a lobbyist, but as a mom. I support SB 19 because it protects, my freedom, my beliefs, and my baby girl. Under the current statutes regarding immunizations and exemptions, I would not be able to send my daughter to school if I wanted to because I am not, quote, an adherent of a religious denomination whose religious teachings are opposed to such tests or inoculations, unquote, even though I believe it would be morally wrong for me to vaccinate her. So to me, SB 19's use of conscience is absolutely crucial to protecting my rights, beliefs, and freedoms, as well as those of many other moms whose testimonies won't be represented here today because they can't leave the house with a potty training toddler or find the time to submit written testimony while they're comforting their teething infant. I would also mention that we have several other states that already have philosophical, personal, conscience type exemptions in their laws, and we're not seeing waves of children dying from diseases that we commonly vaccinate for, so that's not an issue with this bill. The opposition is going to give a lot of different arguments against this bill, but I think the key issue here is one of freedom. Nothing is one size fits all, and the right to say no is fundamental. Please pass SB 19. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Kathy Brown.
Good morning. It's wonderful to see you, Chairman Gossage. I am testifying in favor of this bill. I'm an attorney at law and a nurse, and in both areas, I find myself, to an extent, absolutely astonished that we need to show up because we're Americans, that we actually have to show up and beg from the KDHE or the powers that be that we have the right to refuse an invasive procedure like an injection. Our conscientious rights are the foundation of our whole system of jurisprudence. We don't have any government without our consent. Over the last 4 years, I would say that we probably always believed this, but over the last 4 years, I think we believe it all the more. Having watched the horror of the forced vax with COVID, the lies of Fauci, and institutions we used to trust, we don't trust them anymore the way we did, and we would be stupid if we did. Parents are the best people to decide for their children. And in closing, I want to say there's a reason there's no federal law that controls all this. Because the 14th Amendment says we have privileges and immunities. We have the right to due process. We cannot be forced into this. We will not be forced into it. And I think our opposition is even greater than it was last year at this time. So the states control it. The KDHE is not going to tell us what we do to our children or ourselves. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Melissa Campbell.
Morning, Chairman Gossage and members of the committee. I'm Melissa Campbell, and I'm a citizen. Actually, I'm in Senator Gossage's district, her constituent. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share with you all this morning. I support SB 19, and I would ask your support as well. This bill is only 2 pages. It's kind of our favorite kind of bill. There are a few reasons why people might want to use their conscientious right to refuse. It's our one opportunity to refuse a vaccination without having to have the religious beliefs behind it. A few reasons why we might want to not be forced to take a vaccination might be because we have the 1986 NVCIA Act, which has basically exempted all vaccine manufacturers from liability. I don't know of any other product in existence that doesn't have some kind of liability, and so there's no repercussions if there is an injury to a person for a vaccine injury. Another thing is there are not double-blind placebo tests done. In the scientific community, we try to make sure that there are, like a saline injection versus a vaccine in the safety trial. But in this case, it's actually not because they're putting in the same sort of ingredients in the placebo, air quotes, that is still the same toxic ingredients, so that they're reacting to the aluminum and the heavy metals that are in there. So they have that issue as well. And then another thing is the MTHFR gene mutation. We can't have a one-size-fits-all because it's toxic for us. We can't all detox from the
Melissa,
vaccines.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
Next, we have Festus Krebs III. Is he with us? Let's skip over his name till we get to the end. If he's still not here, I'm afraid we'll miss his testimony. Next, we'll have Gary Morgan. He's actually here. Welcome.
Good morning, Senator Gossage and distinguished committee members. This topic's very near and dear to my heart because it's literally touched every aspect of my life, impacted by the lies and deception of our government, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and the medical establishment as a whole. The resistance to SB 19 is going to be easy to identify. Today, there are lobbyists and representatives from the COVID-19 vaccine enthusiasts feeling threatened by the growing number of people that are no longer believing in the lies and deception of big pharma, big medical, big insurance, and the big university academia that all say things such as these life-saving vaccines have all been rigorously tested and are proven safe and effective. So much money is at stake, such as hospitals incentivized with bonuses to administer the death drug, remdesivir, and ventilators. The doctors being paid annual bonuses for administration of the safe and effective vaccines to our children, all the while Big Pharma is raking in tens of billions of dollars in profit while being immune to any liability for the adverse reactions caused by these mRNA shots. Why should we trust Big Pharma? The mere fact that Pfizer originally asked for 77 years to turn over their safety data screams of cover-up and guilt. But after losing their court case and having to reveal their studies sooner, we all know now that these jabs were neither safe or they certainly were not effective. Yes, the gig is up. Trust in the three-letter institution establishments responsible for the health and well-being of our countrymen is an all-time low. We have the right to simply say no.
Thank you, Gary. Next, we have Connie. No, I'm sorry. We don't allow that in the committee room. Next, we have Connie Newcomb.
Thank you, Chairman Gossage and committee, for allowing me to speak. As someone who has watched public health policies for about 50 years, I've concluded there are 3 types of people, which everyone in this room is one or the other. The first type is the compliant group. This is the largest of the 3 groups by far, and it includes most of the population, including many of the well-educated. If a doctor says do it, they do it. They line up their children and do it. It's just what you do. Within this group are the enforcers. They make sure you do it. They remind me of the farmer who corrals his cows and runs them through a chute to brand and medicate them. They all get the same treatment. In the world of people, forced compliance is called socialism. The second group is the curious. They are a smaller group by far, and whether educated or not, they are generally intelligent. They use reason, thought, questioning, research, and may or may not be compliant. The third group is the conscientious. They have exited from the first two groups. They learned either through experience or the experience of others that compliance can have consequences. Their God-given conscience has been alerted and they are willing to stand. They believe people should have a voice and not just be herded and run through a chute. They have a higher accountability than just to an enforcer, and come what may, they know it is best to follow the leading they have through their conscience. As legislators, if you decide you want to support one group or all, you have this choice with SB 19, the conscientious right to refuse. If you vote against this bill, you will support the complicit, and politicians love the complicit. If you vote for SB 19 as it is, you will be supporting all three groups. The compliant can still get their way, the curious can still be questioning, and the conscientious will have lawful permission to follow their conscience.
Thank you, Connie.
I thought that was American.
Thank you. Next, we have Ashley Prescott.
Chairwoman Gossage and the members of the committee. My name is Ashley Prescott of Lawrence, Kansas. I have 3 children that are 6, 4, and 1. When I had my daughter Evelyn 6 years ago, we chose to vaccinate her with everything that was recommended at the time except for hepatitis B. Fast forward to December of 2020, when my son Hunter was born. We all know that just a month prior, COVID-19 vaccine came out. As a mom of young kids who had different vaccines given every few months, to watch how quickly the COVID-19 vaccine came out with very little testing gave me pause on all vaccines, as did many other young moms that I know. I delayed vaccination and with my son while I did the research, and ultimately I'm glad that I did. You see, at 1 year age, my son started having severe stomach pains that were so bad he pulled out nearly all of his hair. We finally found a doctor in Kansas City with the necessary experience because the vast majority of pediatricians in Lawrence required a child to be fully up to date on their vaccines after 1 year of age, or they would refuse to offer them service. Hunter's stomach began to heal, and one thing Hunter's doctor recommended was due to his stomach problems that he not get vaccinated, as the vaccine contents could exacerbate his stomach issues. I'm glad it was my child's doctor who helped me to make the decision about the best health care for his body. He took an open-handed approach and educated us fairly about vaccines, gave us professional advice, and ultimately left the decision up to us. Hunter deserves not to have a boss, a school district, or a business choose what's best for his body. That's what SB 19 is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Tara Ricketts. Is she on virtual? She is not. Jacob Sattler.
Hello, my name is Jacob Sattler. I'm from Derby, Kansas. I come to you as a father. I have 4 kids. They're all in grade school and high school. My situation is a little bit unique. Most of them are basically fully vaccinated, but they just haven't received any vaccines in the last few years because of, the COVID pandemic opened a lot of people's eyes. And even before that, we had started doing research and found that, the risks involved were just more than we were willing to, take on. Right now, I'm being denied a religious exemption to continue sending my kids to Catholic schools in the Diocese of Wichita. I would ask that even if we can't pass this bill, could we at least change the wording of the religious exemption stuff in the the Kansas laws that talk about the requirements for vaccines in schools. Right now, it has wording that says something about if you belong to a certain religious denomination, then this applies to you, but if you belong to another religious denomination, then it doesn't. I think that the state or anyone really shouldn't be evaluating people's religion. I think that's religious discrimination, and I don't think it would hold up in court if there were lawsuits brought against it. I really think that anyone should be able to apply for a religious exemption and be granted it.
Thank you very much for being here, Jacob. And last call for Festus Krebs III. Okay, seeing he is not here, committee, we now have about 3 minutes for questions. Are there any questions for any of the proponent conferees? Seeing none, I do have a question for Jenna. Regarding the last conferee, and the denied religious exemption, I don't believe it says anything about the law says anything about a particular religious sect.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to find the exact statute. It's not in this bill, but I believe that the wording specifies that the reason why a person is not taking the vaccination is because their religious denomination that they follow has a precept, something wording like that, that would not allow it. And so basically you have to be a part of a religion that says this medical treatment is not permissible
And
in order to receive that vaccination.
state that the employer or the school or, you know, another facility cannot deny or cannot question your religious belief, correct?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that was, so I believe the statute that the proponent was talking about is one that's specific to schools. But there is one that was passed during the special session in 2020. I'd have to go back and look at that.
That's the one I'm referring to. Thank you. I appreciate you checking for that. Committee, any other questions for proponents? Yes, Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, this is for Jenna too, because I was looking at on page 2, that little section 2 and all, and any action brought for violation of this section, a prevailing plaintiff shall recover 3 times the amount of actual damages sustained, or 10,000, which is greater. Somebody dies, 10,000 is not nearly enough. And I've seen some headlines, like a court upholds a $7.8 million verdict for transit workers fired for refusing COVID-19. There's one where a plaintiff recovered over $12 million. I mean, 10,000 seems awfully de minimis to me. And I don't know if that's, is there another clause in here that gives them, because in C1, it says they may recover actual damages, but then in 2, does that limit C1?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you'll see the language in 2, it says whichever is greater, so that $10,000 is actually a floor. So even if you've sustained $0 in damage, you can prove that this, of actual damages, you could prove a violation of this section, you'd get that $10,000. Or 3 times the amount of your actual damages. So whatever actual damages you sustained, it would be 3 times that amount. So if you lost $10,000 worth of wages, times 3, that'd be $30,000, and so on.
It's early. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, we will move to oral opponent testimony. Again, in alphabetical order, we'll begin with Randy Bowman.
Good morning, Chair Gossage, members of the committee. My name is Randy Bowman. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Association of Local Health Departments. Not on? It's on? Okay. Thank you for the opportunity for a few comments. I'll skip over the first part of my testimony there and just those 3 bullet points in there. I think something that needs to be importantly considered in this piece of legislation is employee-employer relationships that we created under this. So if an employer is taking some negative action, and those are outlined in the bill and my testimony, against an employee, but let's use poor work performance. We choose to be, as a right to work state, to make sure our employers can take the actions they deem appropriate under that. So what's to happen if that employee who's terminated for their poor work performance uses this piece of legislation to claim that that was the reason for their termination? So I think there's great risk to drive up costs for goods and services as they have more insurance, more lawyers, more human resources people, ultimately being an inflationary factor and higher taxes because the public sector would have to have those same resources. Secondly, you make a good, sound business decision. Many of you are business persons, so you don't do business with an individual because you don't have the supplies, the workforce, the time. It's just not right for you. They don't accept your bid, but they claim that you denied them services as an organization because of their beliefs. Thirdly, just neighbor to neighbor. We don't do a very good job at this day in our society of working for each other, supporting one another. We could pit each other against one another under this bill. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Randy. Next, we have Heather Brahm.
Chair Gossage, there we go. Is that better? Okay. Chair Gossage and members of the committee, I am Heather Brahm, Senior Policy Advisor with Kansas Action for Children. What happens when too many people begin to opt out of a vaccine like the one for measles and don't have to quarantine when a measles outbreak occurs, which would all happen under Senate Bill 19? Let's focus on the societal costs. My written testimony refers to several studies and data points. Community outbreak responses, even with quarantines in place, can cost millions of dollars. Without quarantines, those costs skyrocket. And the cost estimates do not account for healthcare costs for the infected patients or the loss of income or employer productivity while parents are at home or in the hospital with their sick or isolated child. We do not yet have research studies available to estimate the cost response to the nearly 20 measles outbreaks in the United States since the fall of 2023. But we do know that 89% of the 2024 cases were unvaccinated, and over half of the kids under the age of 5 who contracted measles were hospitalized. If Kansas begins further weakening existing vaccination requirements and eliminate tools like quarantines if Senate Bill 19 passes, we will cost society and our healthcare system millions of dollars or more. Please oppose Senate Bill 19, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Next, we have Jason Gum.
Thank you for letting me testimony. Tim Graham's going to yield his time to me. My name is Jason Gum. I've been an instructor since 1997. I served in the military, and I've worked in hospitals. In the military, we had to get shots so that we were healthy when we went to another country. After 9/11, I joined the Kansas Guard again and had to get more shots to make sure I could go fight if I needed to. When I was in the hospital, whenever I worked in hospitals, we had to get vaccinated or wear masks so that we did not infect sick or immunocompromised people. In classrooms, we lose students all the time because of no vaccines. Like Heather said, all of our measles, mumps outbreaks are from unvaccinated people. At the higher ed level, most of our diseases, our communicable diseases of measles, mumps, and outbreaks are from unvaccinated people or international travelers. We need to keep people vaccinated. I'm not talking about COVID because there is no law saying we have to be COVID vaccinated. I'm talking MMR, polio, let's see another one, chicken pox, so we don't spread those around. Not only do we lose learning time for students, the adults get sick. My wife, as a principal at a school, a small K-12 in Kansas, she had to sub for three different instructors at one time because we have a lack of teachers and substitutes already. That is not conducive to quality education for students. The same high school that she works at, the affiliate where she works at, half the students were gone because people were not vaccinated and getting sick. This is loss of learning. That is not going to help Kansas be a better state in education. That's all I have to say, but I'll stand for questions when at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Next, we have Kimberly Martin.
Chair Gossage and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Kimberly Martin. I'm the legislative chair of the Kansas School Nurses Organization. We are opposed to SB 19 because if we weaken vaccine exemptions, our vaccine rates will go down and diseases that we rarely see anymore will surge when we no longer meet the threshold for herd immunity. If we also weaken the ability of public health officers to be able to mitigate these outbreaks, we end up with a situation like Philadelphia had in 2023. They had an outbreak of measles that was started by an unvaccinated individual contracting measles during travel and then spreading it to other unvaccinated individuals. One of those individuals was sent to daycare despite being told to quarantine after exposure, thus spreading it to others in the daycare, many of which were too young to be fully vaccinated. We have 2 vaccine exemptions that work well for parents, medical and religious. We do not need this exemption that allows anyone to opt out for any reason, which has been proven to lower vaccination rates. Please vote no on SB 19, and I'll stand for questions.
Next, we have Rebecca Reddy, and then she is virtual. Is she on? Okay, Rebecca, can you hear me?
Hear you.
Great. You have 1.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Gossage, Vice Chair Clifford, Ranking Member Holscher, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. I'm Dr. Rebecca Reddy, a board-certified pediatrician in Wichita and a member of the Kansas chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I've been a pediatrician since 1998. I've worked in Wichita since 2002. I've also traveled globally as a physician to serve children in underserved countries and developing countries. I have seen many of these communicable illnesses that we immunize our own children for. I am very concerned that a vocal majority does not understand the potential personal and public health repercussions of a poorly vaccinated community. The United States has had such success ourselves in vaccinating our children that we no longer see or hear of these preventable illnesses in our own circles. And all of these illnesses potentially disproportionately harm children. It's a trap of complacency that I hope you will not succumb to. Communicable illnesses persist in our own communities, around the nation, and globally. Kansas citizens overwhelmingly support the need for childhood vaccines. I hope that you will reject Bill 19. Protecting the health of Kansas children keeps our schools open, our workforce strong, and our communities thriving. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'll stand for questions at an appropriate time.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Reverend Annie Ricker.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Dr. Annie Ricker. I'm a United Methodist pastor here in the Topeka area, and I also serve as the board chairperson for KIFA, Kansas Interfaith Action. I rise in opposition of SB 19. Now, frankly, the scientific consensus on the efficacy and importance of vaccination should be sufficient to vote down this bill. Yet I speak to you as a representative of people of faith. And no mainline denomination has an exemption to vaccination because we affirm the value personally, communally, and in caring for the least and the most vulnerable in our midst. As a preacher, though, I'm a storyteller, so that's what I'm going to do this morning. In 1943, Jean Tierney, an actress, was a part of a USO event to support the troops stationed just down the road at Fort Riley. Jean Tierney met and greeted several soldiers who were preparing for engagement in World War II. Shortly after that event, Jean became ill with what she would later find was rubella, or German measles. For Jean, like most adults, it was a fairly mild illness, and she recovered quickly. However, Jean was pregnant with her first child at the time of her illness, and rubella has dire consequences for fetal development. Jean's daughter was born premature with near total hearing loss and blindness, and with extensive neurological damage. Jean was devastated by her daughter's suffering, and she carried that immense grief the rest of her life. It was because of an unvaccinated person at Fort Riley.
Thank you very much.
That is why we care for our neighbors and get vaccinated.
Next, we have William Wilk.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is William Wilk, Senior Director of Government Affairs for the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. Kansas Chamber appreciates to provide opponent testimony to Senate Bill 19 today. I want to start off by, according to SHRM National, employers have an obligation to accommodate an employee's sincerely held religious beliefs under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, unless the accommodation creates an undue hardship. Religious exemption protections are already offered by the federal government. This bill would prohibit businesses from making decisions based on the safety of their employees. Also, creating additional causes of action against employers like this will only continue to negatively impact our legal climate in Kansas. This cause of action will lead to increased litigation costs, driving up the cost of health care, driving up the cost of insurance premiums, and ultimately driving up the cost to conduct business in the state of Kansas. In order for our state to grow, Kansas must have a friendly environment for conducting business. The Kansas Chamber will continue to oppose legislation preventing businesses the ability to decide what is best for the safety of their employees. Employers value their employees and will do everything possible to protect them through safety programs. Senate Bill 19 ties the employer's hands and prevents open dialogue about risk with workplace travel to places where vaccines might be required to protect employees from illness not common in the United States. Senate Bill 19 does nothing but expose employees to potential illness and employers to new liability. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, William. Committee, do we have questions for the opponent? Senator Thompson.
I'm not sure who to ask this question of, but You know, if you look at the Kansas Constitution and the Bill of Rights in Section 7, and we've discussed this in the past, it says, "Nor shall any control of or interference with the rights of conscience be permitted." And the key phrase in this bill refers to such individuals' refusal is for reasons of conscience. Do an employer's rights supersede the Constitution of the state and Section 7? Because we're talking about individual rights, and we confer that individual right of conscience upon that individual to make that choice. So I'm not sure who to ask. Maybe Jenna. This is more of a legal question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to try to speak to this delicately. What I can tell you is that this exact provision related to vaccination requirements has not been directly challenged in Kansas courts, although there is a 10th Circuit Court decision, and it was about a healthcare worker who refused to get a vaccine. It may have been a flu vaccine. It was from several years ago. And the court upheld that right because the employer offered a reasonable accommodation to not be directly involved in patient care, more of a administrative position, which the employee refused to accept. I believe, I'll have to look up the case, but because of the risk because the court felt that there was a risk to the health of others, they balanced the factors of the right to follow your conscience and refuse a vaccine with the duty of an employer, especially a hospital in this case, to keep their patients and individuals safe. And so I guess we can just summarize it that we can't take these things in a vacuum, that we have to weigh the right of conscience with the risk to others, and that's how the courts look at this issue.
So if I could follow up, Madam Chair, with Jenna on that one. If there is a concern over harm, which is what we're talking about here, and that right of conscience, so this is just one opinion of a court so far. So we haven't had a challenge on the right of conscience in Kansas on these type of decisions as far as we know, correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I haven't looked recently, but I can check into that. There aren't any that have reached high enough up in the courts that I'm aware of at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Committee, I'm going to interrupt the questions for just a moment. And I see, okay. We have, is Carrie Reardon in the room? Okay, we had you down as oral testimony, but we didn't actually receive the written testimony. Was that emailed to the committee? Okay. Yes. Can you tell us when you submitted that? The PDF of the written? We received the email saying you would like to testify, but we did orally, but we didn't receive the PDF. So if you find that, because I want to be fair to everyone, we're happy to let you testify orally. In the meantime, we have some other questions from the committee, and we will go to Senator Erickson, and I believe you are next, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. It's obvious there's a lot of passion on both sides about this issue, but I'm looking at it from the perspective of a retired educator. And so I don't know who this is for, but I, of course, want the safety of teachers and students and their health and well-being always. That's our number one priority in the school system. But I also know in reality that we had many students, for whatever reason, did not have proof of immunization. And our board policy was to let them have until October, November, sometimes, before they had to produce those. So I want to make sure that there's if we think that that's not going on, we're fooling ourselves. But I do have a question, Madam Chair, and it would be, do we have data around how many students in school do not have their immunizations updated, or for whatever reason? We have, I would like to know how many we have and how long they are given to produce those in the semester. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, you may. Please come to the microphone and identify yourself.
Kansas School Nurses Organization, and you are right, we have 60 days because that is the way that the statute is written for immunizations in Kansas. They have 60 days to get compliant before we can exclude them from school. But we do not let them start school unless they have proof of one of every required vaccine. So they don't have to be fully compliant, but they have to show that they have had one of every vaccine that is required. And then for the data that is included in the PDF that I provided, there is a link to KDHE's immunization survey. It's a kindergarten survey because they only collect data on kindergartners since that's the year kids enter school. But the vaccination rates for each vaccine is in that link. So the data is there.
A quick follow-up, if I may. I know that that's the law, but I can tell you from experience and that of every other principal in where I served, we had kids show up with no records. We had no idea what grade they were. We had no idea how old they were. We had no idea their immunization, and they were allowed to come into school without that proof.
On the district. My district does not allow them in unless they have it, unless they have McKinney-Vento status, which is a homeless status, because they are allowed. That is a specific federal law that you do not have to have your records to be in school, because obviously if you're suffering from homelessness, you might not have your records.
Well, how many of those students do we have?
It varies.
How many districts have a policy, or how many students are getting in without any proof of immunization?
I don't know that. Yeah, but I am in one of the largest districts in the state. So. Yeah.
Senator Holscher.
Thank you. I don't know if maybe this question would be best for Tim or Jason in regard to our schools. On the surface, this looks like it's a good idea in the respect that it protects children based on their own conscience or their own situation in terms of refusing a vaccine. But don't we already have mechanisms in place that address that situation?
Jason Gum again, sorry. Yes, there are medical exemptions for people who have a medical reason for not getting vaccinations. And going back to herd immunity, if we have enough people vaccinated, those people who would have an adverse reaction to the vaccine or any vaccine are protected because everybody else is protected. Measles, the most contagious disease out there, because it only takes one particle to infect you. We need 95% people vaccinated for that. And if you get it as a child, you have the possibility as an adult to get encephalitis, which is even harsher on you than as a child. So there are mechanisms for people to opt out for medical reasons.
Jenna, you wanted to address the committee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I found the statute with a little help from Carly that was passed during the 2021 special session. It is KSA 44663, and that relates to employer COVID-19 vaccine requirements. And that's some of the language where the employee would not have to get the COVID-19 vaccine if there was essentially a religious belief, but it didn't have to be with a belief that was held with the sincerity of a religious belief. So the employee for a COVID-19 vaccine, the legislature has a statute for that.
And that's for employee-employer relationship only?
Yes.
Next, we have Senator Petty.
This is a question for Mr. Wilk. Hope you got a drink of water while you're waiting.
I'm good to go now.
Great. So in your testimony, you talked about employers with their employees, if they are traveling and they or going to another location, and the requirement that they might have to have immunization. And could you expound on how you see this legislation impacting that?
Well, if, say, an employee has to go to Africa where there's diseases there that aren't common in the United States, but we have vaccinations that can protect those employees from getting that illness, then I assume that if the employee just does not go through the correct protocol and refuses the vaccine, they come back, then they could file it under a work comp claim, and it could lead to death, obviously. But if the employer has the correct documentation, then the employee would be liable if they were to grant them a religious exemption. Like I said in my testimony, that it's already under the Civil Rights Act and Title VII, according to Sherm National.
So they already have the ability to be exempt from taking that, getting that?
If it's in with the religious exemption, yeah, they could apply for it.
Otherwise, they would need to comply unless this legislation passed, and then if the employer insisted, they would then have action?
Yeah.
To bring against
If
them?
they were to lay off the employee under this bill, then the employee could file the civil cause of action against the employer.
Thank you.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just for anybody who wants to answer, I'm kind of curious, this is kind of working around, obviously, around the COVID issue and the vaccine and a lot of the, the things that we were all told to do and all like that. I wonder if anybody could tell me one of the guidelines that didn't turn out to be false. That's what I thought. Thank you.
All right, committee, other questions for opponents? Senator Holscher.
Thank you. My question is for Reverend Annie Ricker, please. Thank you. I'm trying to think back. I think this is probably the third, maybe fourth time we've heard a version of this bill, so, but I may not remember all this clearly. I'm thinking there are only a couple of religions out there that actually ban vaccines. So could you elaborate on that? Like, I think we're talking a couple, maybe what the population is like, but just based upon, like I said, those actual religions and the fact that, how many are there? And do we require people who get a vaccine exemption to provide proof of their religion? We ask for proof in a lot of other things, so I'll let you elaborate. Thank you.
Reverend Dr. Annie Ricker. So yes, the vast majority of religions that extends beyond Christianity do not have any sort of anti-vaccination tenet as part of their statements of faith. And that also goes to like old order Mennonite or Amish communities that do not practice other modern forms of scientific things. And it extends to communities like Orthodox Judaism or Islamic communities where vaccines might be derived from pork products, porcine vaccination ingredients, and yet those communities still affirm the importance of vaccines and getting vaccinated. So the religious communities that do not promote or endorse vaccination are very small. It would be like Christian Science, and there are a handful of other minor sects of religions. But in order to get the vaccine exemption, you do have to have a letter from your religious person, whether that be a cleric, a clergy person, or another denominational figure, saying that your religious tradition does not endorse vaccination, not just that the person does not feel morally okay with getting vaccinated. There has to be a statute or a tenet of that religious tradition that affirms rejecting vaccination.
I just want to state, Jenna's looking it up, but I seem to recall a year or two ago when we passed a bill that said you do not have to have a letter from a cleric or anyone else that they can't question it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the statute I just mentioned, the KSA 44663 related to the employer COVID-19 vaccine, You just have to have an accompanying written statement signed by the employee that the vaccine would violate the sincerely held religious beliefs of the employee. When we look to the school vaccination requirements, as the alternative to the vaccine certification, you would have to have a written statement signed by one parent or guardian that the child is an adherent of a religious denomination whose religious teachings are opposed to such tests or inoculations.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Probably for Randy Bowman. Thanks, Randy. Quick question. A vaccine is no guarantee that you're not going to get ill. Flu vaccine, for example, correct? They take a guess.
Randy Bowman, Kansas Association of Local Health Departments. Yeah, they're not 100% effective is my understanding.
Okay. And vaccinations, we're learning more about potential vaccine harm all the time with different contents of different vaccines, aluminum, other types of things that are being used in vaccinations. So do you feel comfortable imposing a requirement for a vaccine on someone when you don't fully know what the potential harm is?
Well, I think I would answer that, sir, as I would always be a supporter of more research. And I would also be a supporter of some of the commentary here today of if private corporations, the billion-dollar companies in this world have exemptions, that's probably exemption from liability. That's probably a venue that the legislature should be looking at rather than person makes their choice to refuse and the employer, for an example, can't make their choice to say, okay, you can't work here.
I would think the billion-dollar companies with the exemptions would be a red flag, and the pre-exemptions of people like Dr. Fauci from any prosecution would also be a red flag. Would you not agree with that?
I think corporations are a good place to start looking.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Clifford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder, since there's confusion on how many kids are vaccinated, would you allow a KDHE representative to briefly mention those statistics?
Yes, if there's an answer to that question.
Thank you. Good morning, Farah Ahmed with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. To the question earlier about the statistics, so medical exemptions, we've been tracking them and it's available on that dashboard that was mentioned from the 2010-2011 school year up through the 23-24 school year. Medical exemptions have stayed around 0.25% of the student population. Religious exemptions in that same time period have gone up from 0.75% to 2.75%. So as you kind of heard earlier, there are no major religions that have a tenet against vaccine. We see that a lot of parents do use the religious exemption as the kind of mechanism for not having their children vaccinated and still being able to go to school. And to clarify one other thing, the enforcement of those exemptions are completely up to the school and the school districts and the school boards. KDHE does not require anyone to turn in copies of exemptions. We do not evaluate those exemptions to see if they meet the letter of the law. Again, that is all a local decision.
Thank you, Farah, and thank you, Madam Chair.
If you could stay up there for just a moment, please. Yes, Senator Petty, if we have a moment, I'll get to you. So the question is, that I've been hearing is, okay, all of these people who are immunized, they've had their vaccines. Let's say, and it was mentioned earlier, someone was traveling and maybe out of the country and came back and had measles or whatever it may be that they, tuberculosis. But the people who are already vaccinated, correct, should not be getting that, right?
That is correct.
So if it were spreading, it would only be spreading to those who were not immunized, but not those who had the vaccine. Am I correct on that?
In most cases, again, immunity, whether it's because you have immunity because you had the disease before or because it's a vaccine preventable and you're vaccinated, it might not be 100%. There are diseases, pertussis, for example, where immunity wanes over time. So in a school setting, for example, if there is someone who attends school with a vaccine-preventable disease, they were infectious to others, the local health department and the school nurse work together to figure out who would have been potentially exposed, and of those people who were potentially exposed, who would be actually susceptible to getting the disease because they aren't immune. And then that small group of people would be the ones considered for quarantine if it's required by law.
Thank you very much. Committee, we are out of time. Thank you all for being here. This closes the hearing on Senate Bill 19.